Good morning, nuts and bolts listeners, and a hearty welcome to this Friday with our very special guest, Stephanie Dawson-Cosser. So apologies about last week. I don't know, the technology gremlins were just in it and everything we tried didn't work. So eventually we surrendered because it was just not meant to be. So this week we've got a very, very special guest, Stephanie. I'm just going to introduce her for a moment because her credentials and her CV are just so impressive. So Stephanie is a coach, facilitator, mediator, a blogger, and public speaker. She does a lot of team development work and has been facilitating those in very well-known South African branded companies. And some of you might even recognize her voice from 702, where she features very regularly on Family Matters. So she has over 40 years of experience, so that is a real master guru we have here today. That's a lot of years under your belt, Stephanie. So welcome. And today we're really going to talk about the sandwich generation and how they are challenged, because what's happening is more and more generations are starting to look after their parents, and then they have the children to look after. So they're really sandwiched between the two edges there. And I guess that becomes very challenging at times on how to deal with that and how to manage that. And I think it's just the way society has evolved. Maybe it's always been like that if you think about it 70 years ago, and then we moved away from that kind of concept and now we're back to it again. So that's where Stephanie's going to come in and share with us the challenges of this sandwich generation, how they can deal with it, tips and tricks and everything. So Stephanie, over to you.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. It's really nice to be with you. And yes, the sandwich generation. And this is typically the folk in the age bracket 40 to, roughly late 50s, but sometimes a little bit older. The great thing with medicine and health and exercise is that we're living longer and longer and longer. And hence, this aspect of reality hitting us in this age bracket where we've still got aging parents alive and we've got our children that are hanging around in the nest and sometimes the pocket and the purse as well. And hence parents are feeling sandwiched in the middle of responsibility on both sides. Yeah. And in South Africa, there hasn't been much research, but in the financial services, they've been exploring this because obviously with different life insurances and that sort of making plans for, financing your late years, there has been a little bit of research, and conservatively, they're saying there's about 30% of all middle-aged South Africans fall into this group. And in the States, they reckon it's about 36 to 40% of all people in this age bracket, 40s and 50s, fall into the challenge quite a lot.
Yeah, so the sandwich generation is a global concept, so it's not just a South African, the way I'm hearing it.
Yeah. So it's being noticed. I mean, in different cultures, it's always been a way of life to have your nuclear and extended family all under one roof. But certainly in Western society, it is now seen as a global reality.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And have they moved back into all being under one roof, or is it just the responsibility of having to look or care for your parents, even if they don't live with you? It doesn't matter.
It's both hands. So, often in Western culture, we would provide elderly care and old age homes or retirement villages, which then go on to have frail care and so on. So that concept would count, as well as people having their elderly parents living with them along with their children. So it's both and. It's the sandwich generation is really talking to carrying the responsibility for both ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
So the responsibility is the one challenge, but really, what are the challenges for the sandwich generation? Why is it so difficult, perhaps, or, texting on that generation?
So I think the tough part is that as we grow into adulthood, we, from school, from the get-go, we've had this perception that I'm going to have a career, perhaps. We all have our dreams, that we dream of how life is going to be when we grow up. And some of us have the joy of being able to make that happen. And we may have the so-called fairy tale version of married with 2.5 kids, the dog, the cat, etc., and the house to go with it, or a variation thereof. But we have this expectation, and we're raised, particularly our generation of midlifers now, have been raised with this potential of, you don't just have to make home. You can have a career, for women in particular. You can have a career and be a homemaker. And even a twist on our midlifers have been the house husbands, the husbands who have stayed home and been more the nurturer and the carer. So we've tested the waters in all sorts of different ways. The catch-22 has been that, the parents who are now aging, the older, the grandparent age group, were children in the war, in World War II. And so they were the folk who, if they did work, they then were the folk who would stay in one company. If they got a job, they would stay in that job, because if they would show their commitment by staying in that company and expect to be in it forever and ever, amen, until they had to retire, and then, there would be provision. But because we're living longer, we outlive our pensions and a lot of our financial planning. And now that means that we become reliant on our adult kids, who in turn are still nurturing their children.
And their own careers.
and in the middle, we're still trying to find ourselves, be ourselves, reorientate ourselves for a different career that gives us meaning and purpose. And so it becomes this, not just a sandwich, but like a pressure pot, or it can become like a pressure pot, which then ripples out into all relationships, sadly.
I think what I'm also noticing a lot is that technology is playing a huge role here, because technology is advancing to such a level that the elderly are not able to manage certain things. So they do become reliant or dependent on their children or someone to manage something, be that as banking or email or things, because that's been taken away from them. So some of them, yes, have been managed to step up to it, and others just can't. So I think that also creates a challenge in that sandwich generation.
Absolutely. So you're and the bridge to technology, as you're inferring, Kirsten, some are really excited and can manage Zoom and WhatsApp and so on. And I mean, I just find it amazing. There is another coaching friend of mine who is now 87, and he still coaches online 3 to 4 times a week, and
Kudos
I'm amazed.
to him. Kudos, absolutely,
absolutely.
I think that's beautiful.
So it is possible if you've bridged the gap earlier on in your life. But of course, that's assuming that you still have health, like my friend Ray. There are many elderly folk who are frail, who are battling with dementia, other physical ailments of a variety of kinds. And so they are really physically, mentally, emotionally, and socially dependent on their young adult children for every form of everything that enables them to live. And it's very hard. And if the grandparent has doesn't have dementia, so they're aware of the weight of responsibility that they're causing their children, that can also add a different dynamic of anxiety.
Yeah, it does. I think for both relationships. So, Steph, have you observed any data for that sandwich generation on their level of well-being, be that physically, mentally, emotionally, for being in that situation?
So the Pew Research Center in the US have done some extensive research in this field, but unfortunately way back in 2012. But I think my own experience of working here in South Africa has certainly, I think what I've read in this report from 2012 still definitely holds true. So the data is showing that the stress levels then ripple out in the marriages or cohabitation of adult children, but also across siblings in the family, who are feeling different weights of responsibility. Does one of the adult children take responsibility for their aging parents? Do they share the financial stress, but they one of the siblings lives close to the parents, so they take the day-to-day things. And if there's been no planning, then we live in the world of assumptions. And so often what is causing a lot of the stress is that this stage of life has not been planned for by anybody. The elderly folks thought that they would be long gone, and the children of those parents thought, well, that sibling will take care of them, or that sibling will do it because they're in the same town or whatever. And so there's been no planning. And then, of course, what did the husband and wife, whether it's the son or the daughter,
and then the grandchildren, or or the kids,
everybody piles in
to
the lament of, this is hard, or we don't know what to do, or we don't have the finance for this. And
you just say it's so hard. And as you were saying that, I thought to myself, but it shouldn't. It actually should be nice. You've still got your parents, you've got your children, you've got your own life. I mean, it's a blessing. It's honestly a blessing and an honor to have that there. So what can we do as a sandwich generation to actually see it more or cope with it better?
So I think the first thing is, in fact, right at the beginning of couples getting together, they need to be able to, oh dear, hi, sorry, something dived into my screen there, I apologize. So the first thing is, when couples are even thinking of settling down, if they're going to go the formal marriage pathway, then have some marriage prep classes, and in those classes, the person running those classes should be including, what about the grandparents? What about elderly care? So as part of financial planning, you don't have to get into the nitty-gritties, but it speaks to the value system that each partner has around their thoughts around elderly care for their parents. I
It's a
recently,
very important point, actually.
so it starts right there. I worked with a couple who in their late 30s, early, I think the dad was maybe 40, who was an only child. And he had vowed at 15 to himself that he would care for his parents till their last breath. And he had, in that promise, he had said, I will always provide a roof over their head. Now, that was an internal promise that he had made, and never shared it with his wife. And now we had in-laws under the same roof, and causing conflict in the relationship. So the first thing is have those conversations up front, right at the get-go. Then, as you start planning for your future, you may be planning for, purchasing a house and kids and education for your kids. But now you've got this other line item from the get-go for aging parents. And you need to be able to have that conversation as much with your spouse as with your siblings, if there are siblings.
Because, sorry, just to interrupt you there, because I know most of the aged have not financially prepared for this very late retirement or really late stage of life. So it becomes, like you say, a line item for a sandwich generation to actually consider, to say, how will I finance my parents or my in-laws? So sorry to interrupt you there, but very true.
No. I think I've never heard of it as a line item in financial planning, but I really think it has to be there. And certainly when I do couple work where they're preparing to consolidate their life together, and I say it like that because a lot of people who come to me don't want to get married formally, but they want to move in together and they're thinking long term, that this needs to be part of what goes into the budget, what they're going to spend money on going forward.
It's like a scenario, to play out the scenario, to say, what if our parents move in, or your parents move in, or we have to suddenly financially care for them? So what if? And literally having that all played out, like you would have a conversation with your partner of, do you actually want children or not? I mean, that conversation happens earlier, and then you say yes or no, and then the person says, well, then that's a deal breaker for me, kind of thing. But you're right, with the parents, that's never discussed. It suddenly arrives, and then it, like you say, creates a lot of different dimensions, and it's a lot of pressure for that generation.
Yeah. And the other thing that we also need to do is to have frank conversations with our aging parents, as they are, reaching, as they go. So, I mean, it feels quite hard to think I'm 20 something, my parents are 60 something, and I need to have a conversation with them about their financial situation. But in fact, if you can have those conversations right at that stage, as you start thinking of for yourself as an individual, I need to put some savings away. Have those conversations with your parents, because you then know, have your parents planned for this or not? If they haven't, then I'm going into my adulthood with my eyes wide open. Know that that I even at 20 something, and that's tough because your first salary, you're thinking,
you're gonna blow it. Come on, you're gonna blow it on everything you've been wanting to buy. So that's still gonna stay. But you're right. I mean, there's many things to consider. There's the financial responsibility. There's the couple conversation. There's a value alignment. I guess there's a conversation with your parents, even like, do you want to live in with us, or where do you want to go, or how do you want to do this? And then I think for that sandwich generation, it's really finding that emotional and psychological balance, because it's texting, like, octopus, everybody's pulling at you, everybody wants, and you go sometimes like, what about me? And I,
Yeah.
do I even matter? So I think there's a lot of pressure there. So perhaps just as we're coming to the end of today, what would maybe be some key points you would ask people to consider regarding this whole sandwich generation concept?
So I think some of the key things are, whenever you wake up to realizing that you are coming into this, or you are in this sandwich generation, is to name it, label it, and explore what are we sitting with now.
Okay.
And whether you're doing that in your 30s or in your 50s, and you've got grandparents in their 80s, 90s, name it. And name it with your partner, name it with your adult siblings, and say, let's sit down and map this. What do we need to do? That's the first thing. The second thing is, and then obviously look at the ramifications from a financial planning process. The next thing is, have that intimate conversation with your partner, because this is an in-laws that we're dealing with. And how do you feel about helping to support my parents? And how do I feel about helping to support your parents? And then let's analyze what that looks like. Is supporting just financial, or is it that I possibly do the shopping for your mom and dad to their care home? Do I take your, who's going to take your parents or my parents to the doctor for the checkup? All of those sort of things, to work out how you can do it together. And and so you're getting the practical applications of how we do this thing, caring for aged parents. And then other important factors are, once you are clearly aware of the impact on time that you're spending either with these elderly parents or on behalf of them, which could be the shopping or the doctor's visit or whatever, and the visiting, is how do we prioritize ourselves? We need time. And so
we as a couple and we as a family, if there's children, I think that's two different components again.
So I've had clients reinstate the date night weekly that they used to do when their kids were small, and they'd get the babysitter in, and now the kids will take care of their own supper because they're big enough to do that, and the sandwiched parents go out to a weekly concert or a meal or whatever. But the key thing is that if they don't nurture themselves as individuals and as a couple, then the whole structure begins to quake under the strain. So they need to take care of themselves, so that in order for them to care for both ends on either side.
Got it. I think that's very, very valuable advice, and I think that's key. So we'll leave that here for the week, dear Nuts and Bolts listeners. If you missed today's session, you can always go and re-listen to it on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook. Stephanie, thank you so much for your generous time and sharing of the topic. I'm quite sure a lot of people are going to think about this and can relate to this topic more than we realize. Thank you again, and we look forward to having you again sometime in the future on perhaps another topic.
Great. I look forward to it. Thanks so much, Kirsten.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye.